Over to our final section of the evening, and then we'll have a short questions and answers afterwards. So let me introduce our guest speaker, Paul Champlina. He is widely regarded as one of the UK's leading authorities on landlord and tenant matters, bringing over 30 years' experience in the legal and property sectors. Founder of Landlord Action, he has helped thousands of landlords navigate complex tenancy issues and an evolving regulatory landscape. Known to many through his television appearances, including Nightmare Tenants, Slum Landlords, Paul combines practical insight with a straightforward, engaging style. In this seminar at the Renters' Rights Act, Paul will share his expert perspective on the changes ahead, offering clear, real-world guidance for landlords, agents and property professionals. Put your hands together for Paul, please. Thank you.
Hello, how are you? I walk a lot. I've got a bit of ADHD, I can't help it. How are you, everyone? It's not all doom and gloom. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. So, the game has changed. We're used to the game changing, as James announced before, with all the changes. So I want to say thank you for James and Deborah for inviting me here. When I drove in, I expected to see a T-Rex and Jurassic Park. What a great venue it is. So, and I must have say, Madam, your dog, what a well-behaved dog you've got.
It's not my dog.
Isn't it? Have you stolen a dog? Whose dog is it?
I look after dogs, that's my job.
Oh, do you? I mean, a dog has not made a murmur and he's been listening to Renters' Rights. I mean, unbelievable. I mean, you couldn't write that. And we are going to be talking about pets during Renters' Rights, you'd be pleased to know. But yeah, what a great, well-behaved dog. So look, being a professional landlord, who's a professional landlord? Put your hands up. You are all professional landlords. The day of the part-time hobby landlord are well and truly over, okay? So I worked out, whenever there's legislation change, I get really busy in the media. Like I was just saying to James, I was involved or mentioned, me, Landlord Action or the business, 60 times last month in April in the news media. I did loads of interviews last week on, I think it was Talk Radio, I did GB News, I did Radio 2, I did LBC, all to do with renters' rights. And it's about being informed. And now it's all about compliance. That's the reality. All about compliance and making sure you don't get fined, okay? My job is to make landlords streetwise and making sure that we are raising standards and actually to change the perception of landlords. Because I can see there's loads of Ferraris in the car park here. Because that's the perception of the government. They think you're all greedy so-and-sos. And actually, you are normal people and you care about tenants. And you're working people, aren't you? Even though Keir Starmer doesn't think so. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. So I became a landlord by default. I worked out in 1995. I bought a property, lived in it, rented it out, went to move in with an ex-girlfriend and became a landlord default. And in 1995, there was no deposit scheme. There was none of that stuff, obviously, which James talked about. But my background is legal. I used to live in Brighton, not far from here, for a few years. And I started work in 1987 as a 16-year-old as an outdoor clerk on £4,200 a year, issuing court proceedings, going to court. I did my first court hearing at 16 at Brighton County Court. At 17, I did 14 hearings in one day in the recession. Who had a property at 15%? Put your hand up. A few of you here, yeah. And when you say that to landlords or to the Gen Z or millennials, they think you're mad. Because the reality as landlords is that we've had 0% interest rates for 12 years. People forget that. We had it good for a long time, you know. And the reality now with regard to interest rates, they are at a norm, you know. So my background was doing debt recovery, doing repossessions, doing court hearings, doing bankruptcy. So I did that. I moved back to London, did that for a period of about 8 years. And then I went and had a bit of a career change, but still in the legal profession. I became a bailiff and a private investigator and a process server, and always dealt with evictions. So from one day to another, I was doing all different things. So I'd be doing a surveillance, I'd go and clear travellers' sites out, I've been spat at, abused, sworn at. And that was just me being at home, to be honest. But no, I've been to some of the worst council estates in London, collecting council tax. I've hid inside an industrial wheelie bin in Clapham to serve a divorce petition on a lady, believe it or not. I jumped out of a bin, this is God's honest truth, at 7 o'clock in the morning, and my mate took a picture. I was a process server, so I had to serve documents. I went to Egypt once and served a CEO of a bank in Cairo with a writ for $9 million and got chased out of the building. That was a bit scary. So I'd done some mad stuff, but I'd always done evictions. And I did it for fixed fees. And I met my old previous business partner, who was a portfolio landlord in North London. And he said, Paul, I need some help. He goes, I've got 25 illegal immigrants living in a 2-bed flat in Edgware in North London. And I said, yeah, I can help you. And I did it all for fixed fees. It was unheard of at the time. I worked with a firm of solicitors so we could go on record. And out of that meeting and working together, we used to play football together, pardon me, we set up Landlord Action in 2000, before the buy-to-let boom in 2003. And we set the business up, and 4 months into setting the business up in 2000, millennial, so now I've been running the business for 26 years. I was 6'2" when I started, had a hard life. We've dealt with, most probably, I worked it out, over 50,000 instructions in 26 years. We could fill a football stadium up of problem tenants. But how do you define a problem tenant? I'll come on to that a little bit later on, because people do fall in hard times. And I believe always give a tenant a chance, because a good tenant doesn't turn into a bad tenant overnight. And so from doing that, I remember we had a half-page editorial in the Evening Standard, where a lady called Mirabah Hillel, she was a chief writer. In the old days, the Evening Standard was a proper paper. Now it's just like 2 pieces of paper, And we had 15,000 calls over the course of 10 years from this one article. So I understood PR at a very early age. And then I did my first TV program in 2001, 2002 for Thames TV. It's not even Thames TV anymore. And it was quite funny, actually. So what happened was, they wanted to film in the office, had an old serviced office in Mill Hill in North London. And I understood, when you deal with TV, the TV companies, they kind of like use you a little bit, and you find, well, when you do TV, that was prime time, that was going out to quite a few million people. At 8 o'clock, it was the Tonight programme. And I actually got people to come into the office and pretend they worked in my office to make it bigger. So I had a couple of actresses, quite good looking actresses, whatever, and had a mate, and they were walking around me, and the office looked like Steptoe and Son, I can tell you that now. And I was getting all my relatives and friends calling up, like making sure the phone's being really busy. So I understood PR really quickly, and media. And then for me, on my property journey, I've worked with the government, doing loads of advisory work. I've been quite instrumental in quite a few law changes. The law change that came in 2012, a squatters law coming in where it became a criminal offence. Housing courts, the abolishment of Section 21, I gave evidence at Parliament, the Deregulation Act and retaliation eviction. But actually, in 2017, I sold my business to a company called Hamilton Fraser, and you'll see on some of the next slides. And we help and act for about 600,000 landlords and about 24,000 letting agents. So we own My Deposits, we own the Property Redress Scheme, we own Client Money Protect, Landlord Action, Landlord's Own, Total Landlord Insurance. So I'm on the board of that company. There's only 3 of us on the board. We've got 250 staff in Bournemouth. So I live and breathe the private rental sector, and I've seen the changes. And yes, there has been landlord panic, and that landlord panic came in unprecedented when the renters' rights came in on the 1st of May. I felt so strongly about it because I could see it coming down. It all started when you talked about, and obviously you talked about as well, in 2017 when George Osborne brought in the abolishment of mortgage interest relief. And as a landlord in business, we're the only business that gets taxed on turnover rather than profit, which makes no sense whatsoever. So that was the start of it. And for some landlords, the renters' rights, for some of the older landlords, has been the tipping point. But I say to all landlords out there, and I say this, and this is I worked it out, my 17th talk in the last 2 months, whether it being live public speaking or a webinar, I say to landlords, you don't need to sell, don't sell. What you have to do is, this is business valuation time, with regard to looking in the mirror and saying, do I want to carry on self-managing? because it is becoming more and more work intensive. There is the biggest challenge, and I'm going to touch on this, with renters' rights is going to be rent repayment orders and civil penalty notices, period. Okay? Let me get some water. So I think the reality is, there's a lot of landlords that don't actually put a price on their time, and that's where landlords are at, you know. And the rhetoric, you know, it's all very political. We had renters reform, then it went to renters' rights. The Conservative government didn't bring in the law and had a wash up, and there was a election, and then renters' rights. There was a spike in with regard to some of the stuff that came in. A lot of the renters' rights stuff is very, very workable. And actually, it was about levelling up. You have 11.5 million tenants, 2.7 million landlords, and there is a lot of voting relating to that. But quite rightly, a tenant deserves a secure property, a safer property, a better property, and the private rental sector stock is far better than social housing stock, period. I say that often, all the time, in the papers and in the media. But I think the reality is, the headline is, and as Dan was saying, and I'll touch on it, and we'll have a bit of repetition, but I'll whiz through it, is the headline is non-fault Section 21 periodic tenancies. What do we want as landlords? Well, there's a saying that I say when I'm on the road. I said it 3 weeks ago when I was in Blackpool doing a talk. No news is good news. Do we agree with that? As long as my rent's paid on time, as long as my tenant is respectful, as long as my tenant gives me access, I'm happy. And historically, as landlords, we didn't put rents up. We got forced to put rents up when we had this trust and charge in 2022, when last year alone you had 1.5 million mortgages come to a fixed term end. So they went up. And of course, everything that's being brought in with renters' rights, is to protect tenants. But the reality is, with renters' rights, with what's going to happen, it's going to get worse before it gets better. There's going to be a transitional period. And what's going to happen with the landlords that have kept their nerve and stayed in, you will see rents go up. That's my prediction. Because stock is going to be dwindling. And the reality is, and again, when I went to see my MP, and I met her 3 times, and I became her rental or lettings expert, Teresa Villiers, was I said to her, we are going to have a landlord panic and a rental stock crisis. I believe that's going to happen. I believe there will be an extra burden on the councils and temporary accommodation. And there, at the moment, you've got 11 to 14 tenants vying for one property. Obviously, it depends geographically where you are, but I think demand is going to go up. And when demand goes up and there's less property, rents go up. You know, void periods will come down. So that's why I think it's half full rather than half empty. You know, it may not feel that. And it may feel that as landlords we're an easy target because, of course, we get taxed and there's fines and all that stuff. And I'll talk about the councils soon. But this is a game of compliance. You know, how many of you self-manage? Put your hands up so I can understand. So quite a few of you, okay? How many of you love taking a call from a tenant at 5 in the morning, they're drunk and they've lost their keys? You do. You need to get a social life, mate. Right. So that's the reality, right? But remember, what are our tenants? They are our... And all say it at once. They're our customers. What do we want customers to do? What do we want our customers to do?
Be happy.
Be happy. Happy tenants, happy landlord. We hear all that. But more importantly, we want our tenants to stay in the property as long as possible. That's why periodic tenancies have come in. There's no end date. Anyone know the average term of a tenancy now, of a tenant staying in a property? Anyone know? Who said it? 4 years. The reality is there was a false misconception that basically fixed term tenancies meant that, you know, they called it non-fault. And I can tell you now, my sister, she's been renting 15 years. I've been her guarantor for all that time. And thankfully, she's paid the rent. But the reality is, she says, Paul, every time I get a WhatsApp from my landlord, I get anxiety. And that is the reality with regard to the landscape from tenants. You know, a lot of them are being asked under Section 21 to leave the property, up sticks, and the unintended consequence. And I remember in 2019, I had the government in my office on a working group was related to housing courts, you know, and there would have been housing courts and there would have been investment in the court system before banning Section 21. That has not happened. and I'm going to come onto the court system, you know, the average wait time for a court hearing, you know, the average time for full possession is about 8.5 months. The average rent arrears nationally is about 8.5 grand. In London, it's about 12 grand, you know. And landlords are not banks, so it's about protection and what you have to do. So I understand about the security, and on average, a tenant is paying 37% of their wages towards rent. That's a lot, isn't it? So it's becoming unsustainable. And that's why you're seeing tenant resentment. That's why you see the tenant groups, Shelter, Generation Rent, Acorn and whatever, that have pitted themselves up as a them and you scenario, which doesn't help. Which really does. I mean, I debated with one tenant group on the Jeremy Fine on the Radio 5, not the Radio 2 the other day. It doesn't help, because when you have all that and you have good landlords that are leaving the sector and taking their property. So let me give you this stat. And everything I said five, 6 years ago, when I saw the white paper renters reform, has come about and has come true. So on average, and there was a recent survey which came out a couple of days ago by Savills. 254,000 properties have been lost out of the private rental sector up to March 2026 for 1 year. That's almost 700 properties a day being left in our sector. Where are those tenants going to live? Yeah, that's the reality. And you can tell politicians, I tell them to blue my face, and I tell it how it is. I'm a Cockney geezer, and I tell it how it is, because I've been doing this for a long time, you know. And what happens is stock gets diminished, it shrinks. And then, of course, we're not building enough houses. Are we building 1.5 million properties by the time Labour leave? Sorry, I shouldn't be political. Are we going to build that? Yes or no? No. We need 25,000 bricklayers, 15,000 carpenters. It ain't going to happen. So the private rental sector is needed more than ever. We have a social housing and temporary accommodation crisis. So landlords are needed. And my suggestion, I said it, and I work with the NRLA, I work with Property Market, I work with the great and the good industry. You needed to incentivise landlords to stay in the sector. Not all first-time buyers are going to buy landlords' properties. It's not going to happen. So the guys that have stayed in, even though you look at the landscape, the guys that stayed in, your rents will go up. Your properties will rent, and that's why you've got to stick at it, But the system changes. Processes, more regulation. We're used to it, we're flexible, we're adaptable. But as I say to landlords, this is business review time, and that's really important. So these are the brands that we represent. I won't go into those, but these are all the brands we represent. So we run 3 government schemes, and most probably we'll be looking at under property redress scheme when landlord redress comes in, when most probably be a supplier. My Deposits is our marquee brand. We protect £1.3 billion worth of deposits. Last year we did 16,500 adjudications. Anyone know what the most common dispute is under deposit at the end of tenancy? Shout out, anyone?
Cleaning.
Cleaning, correct, yeah, cleaning. Next slide, please. Thank you. So some stats. A fifth of the market is private rental sector. 16% is social housing. It's dwindling. Last year alone, we only built 6,000 social properties. We have got a population of 70 million people. Where are they going to sleep? They need a home. And actually, when you're renting a property out, you rent to a tenant that they want that property as a home, don't you? Correct? Do you rent your property out, a property that you would live in? That's something that I say to landlords. That's important, because the name of the game is I want my tenant to stay. I want a happy tenant. I need to be professional, yeah? I need to make sure that I have communication with my tenant, understand the terms of the tenancy, Understand that there's common areas and what you have to do and when the lease and all the everything you have to do with local amenities. The biggest problem with landlords, self-managed landlords, they don't talk to their tenants enough. They don't explain what their legal obligations are, and that's an issue. A lot of it is down to communication when it comes to disputes. So look, the rents are going up. Look, that's the average monthly rent in England is £1,400. In London, it's £23,500 a month. Yeah. Affordability is an issue, and I think that going forward, we talked about the war in Iran and we talked about inflation. I think interest rates will most probably start creeping up as inflation goes up. I think the reality is, affordability is going to be an issue. I can see rent arrears going up, and we're talking about rent guarantee insurance. You know, tenant demand is still going to be strong. You know, I'm sure that if you've advertised and you've rented a property, you could ask anyone in the room, the demand is still really strong. The peak was actually in 2022. I remember doing some training for a really well-known letting agent to all their offices, and one guy said he had 105 applicants. He did open house viewing for a flat in Clapham. 105 applicants. But what does that mean? It means that you get the pick of the best tenants. Remember that. Yeah? So how do we qualify tenants? What are our processes? What are our systems? Yeah, next slide please. So, we've talked about, and I'm going to whiz through some of this, and go into a little bit more detail because I'm conscious that we've talked about some of that. But the no fixed terms tenancies are going, a periodic 1 month tenancy, APT in a short periodic tenancy does not have an end date. Okay? And of course, they call it non-full. And there is always a reason why a landlord serves a Section 21. So let me just talk to you about Section 21. So I run landlord action, set it up, got 25 staff. Last year we did 4,200 instructions. This year we're going to do a lot more. I've never ever closed the doors to the public. I closed the doors 10 days before. The 20th of April I closed the doors because demand was through the roof. And when it comes to the Section 21, you have to go through the deregulation documents, make sure that stuff, and we had to make sure it goes through the door. And what we didn't want to do was get sued by landlords saying, and a lot of the time landlords don't get the right documentation, which is part of a problem. But they call it non-full, but there's normally a reason. And that word non-full actually came from I was on Panorama quite a few, must be 7-8 years ago. And it was a programme about, actually it was based in Kent, a guy called Fergus Wilson, a very well-known landlord, quite notorious, and he was serving Section 21 notice. You're smirking for some reason, right? He served notices on the whole road, and and I've met him a couple of times and whatever, but they called it non-full, and it was a very tenant-centric piece. I was on for that 17 seconds speaking up for landlords, and I said there's always a reason. The most common reason, actually, historically, has been rent arrears. Now it's landlords selling. So Section 21's going. You have to have a ground, obviously, to serve notice, which Darren talked about. There's stronger protection for tenants. Obviously, with regard to rent rises, how's the first-tier tribunal going to be dealt with? Again, you need to make sure that you've got a power team running, people that know what they're talking about, experts in the industry. It's really important. Because you can't do everything, and you will make mistakes. Landlords always make mistakes. But you've got to make sure they're not fatal and they don't cost you a fortune. That's the key. That is the key. And remember one thing: tenants are going to get much more clued up. Why? Because they have AI. AI is going to tell them everything. All of a sudden, your tenants are experts. They're experts in everything. So you're going to have more defended cases. Darren will love that, right? You're going to have more scenarios where tenants would challenge. Okay, so you have to be ready for that. Yeah, we are now in 2026, the environment has massively changed. Remember, I became a landlord in 1994, 95, there was no deposit scheme. You could beat someone in the pub, shake their hand and give them the keys. Those days are well and truly over, yeah? And then of course, we've also have a scenario, so you flipped the slide without me telling me. I'm gonna sack you, James, all right? Okay, so also, there is gonna be a landlord redress scheme. So, as agents, with Maddison Residential and all agents, they have to be part of a redress scheme. So there's got a complaints procedure. Landlord, tenants, sellers, buyers can make a complaint about the agent. As I said, we run the property redress scheme. We have 20,000 members. We're getting 400 agents a month joining us. But there's redress. Now the government are saying, and the whole point they're bringing members' rights in, they're saying, landlords, you need to up your game. You need to be more professional. Yeah, because tenants are paying 38% of their wages towards rent. They need a better service. You need to understand your obligations. So in Scotland, they brought regulation in. In Wales, they brought regulation in. And yes, there was people that exited, and then the market shrunk a little bit, and then it settled down. But the reality is you're going to have to join a redress scheme mandatory. That's not going to come in, I don't think, we're on the working group on that. That won't come into about 2027 because there's IT. With that in hand, there's going to be a landlord database. So all the landlords, 2.7 million landlords, have got to join a database, which won't happen. When my deposits cap on, right, we still get landlords now that still haven't put the deposit in the deposit scheme. But don't worry, it only came in 18 years ago, right? Okay, so the reality is it's about the enforcement. Okay, and I think you have to understand government want to know where landlords are. So you'll have to upload your information on compliance so that tenants can find out. I mean, I actually think in the new world, tenants should qualify and reference landlords, right, to a certain extent, because the tenant is driven by the property and by the price, not by the landlord. And of course, if landlord's selling or they're a part-time landlord, there's no long-term vision. And then that's where the Section 21 came in and tenants have to leave, they've got to take their kids out of school, and it can be very stressful when they go in temporary accommodation. So, and I think when it comes to, obviously, when it comes to redress, most of the complaints, and whether tenants will try it on, I am a bit cynical, but, you know, most of the complaints most probably be maintenance and repairs and so forth. But, so, and I actually think, and I got asked this, I think it was in the Telegraph, I answered this question last week. I actually think landlords should take a course. There should be a mandatory course like Rent Smart Wells on property management, albeit, how many of you are members of the NRLA? Put your hands up. Yeah, a few of you. So I do a lot of work with the NRLA. We're one of their main partners. I do loads of talks at the conference and so forth, which is a really good support mechanism for landlords for 100, 120 quid a year. I'd recommend it. Have an advice line and so forth, because landlords do need support, and it can be quite a solitary business. And that's why you're all here to understand and learn what's on the horizon. And then a tenant can request a pet. Right? I'd definitely take you as a tenant with your pet. What a great pet. I've got a dog. Do anyone know what dog I've got? I knew you'd say what one. I have a cockapoo, madam. It's called Kiko. Right. So if I had to rent a property and I couldn't rent with my dog, I'd be devastated. So it helps a tenant's mental health, but actually as a landlord I could say, and you could come and say, bring your lovely dog, and I'd say, yeah, straight away you can come in because he hasn't made a murmur, right? He's very good. But how can I reference the dog, right? Is the reality. But you can make a request and I can say, okay, fine. And I have to have a valid reason to say no. So if there's a head lease and it says no dogs, then HMO, you know, there's other people, there's a problem with allergies and whatever. You make me feel really bad now stroking the dog when I'm talking about this, right? Right? But the reality is I can decline. With the Conservative government under Renters Reform, they turned around and said, I can request that you take pet insurance out for damage. And by the way, with my deposits cap on, because I have meetings or whatever, we hardly get any pet damage disputes, believe it or not. It is cleaning and wear and tear and malicious damage and all that stuff. So a tenant will pay more rent and stay longer as a pet owner, that's a fact, you know. So I think it's a good thing, and obviously, is it feasible? What's the property? So that's why they want landlords to accept more tenants and for the tenants' well-being. There's also a couple of other scenarios. As a landlord, you cannot ask for more than 1 month rent in advance. Do you know about that? Yes or no? Yes, you know about that. Okay, so you can't now, the new act, say, I want 6 months rent in advance. That's a breach. Okay, I'm going to test you right at the end of this talk, by the way, and there's prizes to be won. So Deborah and James kindly offered to give you a week's cruise, Mediterranean cruise. No, that's not the case. Oh no, you can have a stress ball instead. Right. So the reality is, you can't ask for more than 1 month's rent in advance. Okay, and 1 month's rent in advance, 1 month's deposit. If it was retrospect in the old days and you asked for 6 months rent, you've got 12 months, you've got the student market, tenant may be in a poor credit rating, overseas tenant, whatever, you could have accepted it in retrospect. In the new world, with a new tenancy, 1 month rent advance. Once they've moved in, if they offer to pay 6 or 12 months, you can take it, but do not demand it. Are we clear on that? If you demand it, that's a breach, and you don't want to breach. We'll do questions at the end if you don't mind. Sorry. Go on, ask the question.
No, just if the tenant offers it from the get-go,
yeah.
Can you accept?
So what you can't do is on the tenancy, you have to put 1 month's rent, 1 month's deposit. What I would say is once they've moved in, have to move in. Once they've moved in, you can carry on that conversation. Say yes. Do you still want to pay that money? They can turn around and say no. Yes, I want to pay 6 months rent in advance. You can take that money. You can accept it. Must not demand it. Okay, really, really important, but you can accept it, and landlords can do that, yeah? Okay, so the decent home standard, and there's going to be enforcement, which was talked about, I trained environmental health officers in Hull about 3 weeks ago. Actually, on Awab's law, I'm doing some work. I've got a meeting with the government in 2 weeks' time with an absolute expert on mould, a lady. And of course, a poor boy in 2022 called Awab died of mould. No one should ever be in that situation. It was a social property, it was Rochdale Housing Association. So now, which is in the social housing sector, with Awab's law, the landlord has to respond in 24 hours and there's a time process. Very, very reasonable. A lot of this stuff is really, really reasonable, yeah? It's illegal to discriminate against your tenant in advertising. No DSS tenants, no tenants with children, right? You cannot openly advertise, that's discrimination. But, there's a but. When you get 25 tenants vying for your property, okay, and I don't know how you do your referencing, how you do your qualifying, because you have to do qualifying. I know landlords that meet tenants at their property they're currently living in, because there's one thing as landlords you get is gut feeling. Gut feeling is great, but gut feeling alone in this new act is not going to see you through. It's about dotting your I's and crossing your T's. This is about affordability. This is about making sure you pay your rent, okay? And we'll talk about bad tenants a little bit later on. So, discrimination, you can't do it. But if you've got a couple that work at the hospital and their joint income's 125 grand a year, or you've got a single mother with 3 kids, who are you going to pick? That's the reality. That's an unintended consequence. So when we commissioned a report, I commissioned a report with the NRLA and Property Mark in 2019, before COVID, called Beyond Section 21. And we said that the vulnerable tenants, when the new act comes through, will miss out, unfortunately, because of affordability, the rent's going up, and making sure who you're going to pick. And that's an unintended consequence of what's going to happen, unfortunately. But you can pick who you want on affordability. And then when you get your referencing, will you use an agent? How do you qualify that? What's the affordability? Referencing now is getting much more smarter on tech. You have open banking, go on social media. Social media tells you everything, you know. My tenant in Thailand spending a fortune, or Mauritius, you know, what can you do? It tells you on LinkedIn what's their current job, you know, what's the pay slip. You have to be your own detective. Because once they're in, yeah? And it's important. And I can tell you, because I've been doing this job a hell of a long time, and I've told you my background, you know, we've dealt with serial bad tenants. Worst serial bad tenant we had at Landlord Action was 148 grand. He knocked 6 different landlords. I evicted him twice and exposed him on BBC Inside Out. You know, I've been to more brothels than you've had at dinners. Obviously professionally, of course, right? Cannabis factories, subletting scans. Subletting is absolutely rife. I've done a whole campaign of subletting. I'm on a board, I do a lot of non-exec work with a company that spots subletting on tech. If you write this company down, they're called Title Guardian. Spot subletting, you know. So there's, and what's going to happen? And I'm actually in talks at the moment with Panorama. They're doing I'm looking to do some film in the next 2-3 weeks. They're doing a half-an-hour special on tenant fraud in the private rental sector. So I'm going on as an expert. So ending bidding wars. So what happened is, if you advertise the property, what happens is, if you think about ending bidding wars, all that's going to happen is landlords just put the rents up. And actually, statistically, if you go with a letting agent, they will get you a better tenant and they will achieve higher rent. You know, that is a fact. And tenants prefer dealing with letting agents, that's another fact as well. But when it comes to bidding wars, if you advertise your property for 1,500 quid, you can't take a penny over. Okay? That is a breach. You can take money up to. And what was happening in the height of 2022, you were getting 50, 60 applicants and you were narrowing it down to 3 or 4, and then they were doing an auction. The government has stopped that, okay, which is fair enough, but that you'll see rents naturally will go. You think, well, I was going to put it for 1,200, I'll stick it in for 1,400. You can take lower, you can't take more. That's one of the rules coming in. The strengthening of the authority, civil penalty notices, rent repayment orders. I'm going to go into a bit more detail. They are landlords' biggest challenge out of all of this. Councils need to raise income, yeah? I could do a whole presentation on licensing, yeah? Mandatory, discretionary, selective licensing, complete minefield. Landlords will say it's just a tax, you know. And I'm on a programme of Nightmare Tenant Slum Landlords, as you know, and we exposed, you know, rogue landlords. And yes, there's rogue landlords, but there's a hell of a lot more rogue tenants. I decided to say that at tenant convention. That went down like a bag of sick. Right? But that's true. It's true. There are rogue landlords, there's criminal landlords, and we don't need them because we get tarnished with them. You know, and there's perception we've got loads of money and we care about whether. And there's different types of landlords out there. You know, there is different types of landlords. So rent repayments, what will happen is you will see a flurry of a new industry rising up, which will be no win, no fee solicitors. I don't know if you've come across it, we've come across it, where they will, you'll see it in the social housing sector, housing conditions and rent repayment orders. So rent repayment orders at the moment are 12 months. They're going to go to 24 months within a year of the offence. Okay, I've got a slide on that talking about that. That is going to be a challenge. And they will charge no win, no fee. Has your landlord done this? Have they not done that? And tenants will go for it. Just like if you don't put a deposit scheme, which has been around obviously for the day dot from 2007, where they can go for 3 times plus the deposit in compensation. This is bigger business. Can you imagine if you've got, you know, joint tenancies or you've got an HMO and they have a WhatsApp group, because tenants communicate in WhatsApp, and you haven't heard from them for a year, and then a month 8 after, you know, them leaving, you get 7 or 8 tenants that are putting claims in because you didn't use the wrong ground, you weren't licensed or you weren't on the database. It can cripple a landlord. That, for me, and this is what I want you to learn, is the rent repayment orders. You know, and that's why if you go to a company like, you know, Maddisons Residential, you go to an agency, they can be your safety blanket because they have professional indemnity insurance, and that's really important. You know. So that's the first phase. The big bang has now happened from Friday. Yeah, and then the digital database introduction to the Ombudsman. That will happen in 2027, I'm pretty sure of that now. And then I think my personal opinion is they should have phased in the banning of Section 21. There should have been a halfway house from Section 8 to Section 21, a longer notice period. They should have fixed the courts. They haven't fixed the courts. They should make sure landlords have confidence they can get their properties back in a timely fashion if there's a breach of tenancy. But this is about votes. It is. It's the biggest one of the biggest manifestos in Labour, which is obviously housing, you know, and we have to accept it. You know, and then obviously we know politically things may change. Obviously we've got the elections tonight. So this is really important stuff. So Darren touched on it. This is, how many of you have served the information sheet? Put your hands up. Presumably none of you, the others. Have you heard of this information sheet? Okay. James, can you help them? No, I'm being serious. Do you want to get fined £4,000 to £7,000? You've got until the 31st of May, which by chance, and I haven't planned, this is my birthday, so you don't have to give me a card. That's my birthday, I promise you. Right, and 1st of May is my daughter's birthday. You've got to serve the information sheet by the 31st of May. Okay? So, all your periodic and fixed term tenancies, they moved across on the 1st of May to APTs, a short periodic tenancies. You have to tell the tenant of the information sheet, which is a prescribed document, a 3-page document, and you can serve it by PDF in an email. You want them to get into acknowledge it. If you don't know their email address or belt and braces, you hand deliver it and take a picture, just like you process serve a notice. We do that. I've got a client. I for lots and lots of people. You know, one of my mates, who I knew since 12 years old, one of the biggest landlords in Brighton. He's got 1,400 tenants. He's serving them, but he's got a lot of them he hasn't even got email addresses for because they've been there historic. He's got to go round and hand deliver and take pictures. You've got to make sure you do it. It's really, really important. James and his team later on. So the information sheet can be done by PDF. It can't be done on a link, and you can email it. Ideally, you want the tenant to acknowledge it, or you hand deliver it and take a picture, belt and braces. Once that's gone, I can tell you now from publicity that I've done, Bristol Council, they're actually putting a levy if the tenant's vulnerable and actually putting an uplift on a fine. You've got to realise a lot of councils are skint. Do we know that? Yeah? This is easy money. Landlords are low-hanging fruit. I'm being quite cynical here, but it's the truth. Yeah? Let me tell you this question. Licensing fees, paying a licence. I don't know what the licensing rules are around here, but it's a minefield, licensing. The top 50 councils made last year £326 million just in licensing fees alone, not in fines. Big money business, yeah? And I don't want any of you to be fined just because you haven't served a letter, a document. You know, dumb insolence is not a defence, so it's really important to get this right. Out of everything I'm talking about, this is the immediate, now, urgent thing you need to do. And it's on each tenant. There's 4 tenants on the tenancy agreement. Each tenant has to be signed with this document. Yeah? Because all you need is a clever tenant going on AI. Or they've seen an advert, or they see a shelter advert, they speak to their mates, you know. This could be more so a fine, but the council's going in. And I know from training the environmental health officers 3 weeks ago in Hull and East Riding Council, I trained all their guys with me and Lisa when it came to mould and Arab's law, and they're gearing up for it. Yeah, it's income, and I don't want you to get fined. And if it's an oral tenancy, which is very, very, very rare, you have to serve a written statement giving details of what the tenancy is. But hardly any tenancies are oral tenancies. So this is a little bit of work.
Sorry, Paul, can I
Yeah.
very quickly go back? Because I've spoken to James about this. I got a verbal agreement from a lady who lived, she was born in the house. I was left with my sister back in 1987. She's 85 years old now.
Well, actually, rent protected tenant, or is she an assured tenant?
Yeah.
Yeah, so rent protected tenancies, rent protected tenancies fall outside the Act. You won't need to, you won't need to see in information. What I would do, just in case, is serve one anyway. Yeah, you know, like we talk about belt and braces, but it falls outside the Act. Just like company agreements or licences, they fall outside the Renters' Rights Act. That's why a lot of landlords are looking at temporary accommodation and social housing and guaranteed rents and stuff like that as a security. But I would serve it just in case.
Because there's a minimum amount of information.
Well, it would be minimal. I would serve most probably the written statement rather than the information sheet, because it's an oral tenancy. I think it falls outside the Act because it came in obviously before 1988. So obviously, why do we use Section 21? It's an accelerated possession procedure, which Darren talked about. On average now, a judge is looking at an accelerated possession case about 15 minutes. 15 years ago, it was 90 seconds. What will happen is, and this is what I've been talking about all the time, Q1, Q2, Q3, 2026 will be the indicator of how many Section 21s are being served. No one knows how many Section 21s are being served. I'm saying thousands are being served. From letting agents to landlords to corporate landlords to solicitors. There's 4,500 solicitors that do landlord and tenant. And we're one of the biggest that do landlord. We just do landlord and tenant, we don't do anything else. And we've been inundated, you know. We had 32, 35 instructions in one day, which is unprecedented, in one day, you know, and I just had to turn the taps on because I had to think about my staff, because now there's so much more to look at when it comes to that. So historically, service Section 21, there's rent arrears, there's an unintended consequence, because when you go on Section 21, a lot of the councils tell the tenants to stay put. I did an article on that last week with regard to the Telegraph. So the councils will blatantly say, don't stay, and I exposed it on the programme. I did 62 episodes, and about 4 episodes, I showed a tenant that was waiting to eviction when I went to bailiffs. They were waiting for the warrant, going to the council saying I've been evicted. And it's done on a point scoring situation. If they're more vulnerable, they get housed. We've got 1.3 million people in council waiting list. We've got a temporary accommodation crisis. It's costing a fortune, yeah? That's going to rise because of the avalanche of Section 21s that have come in the next year. And the gauge will be how many claims are issued. The most claims that have ever been issued was in 2015, was 35,000. That was when the Deregulation Act came in. I think that's going to increase, most definitely. But there will be more Section 8 hearings. But what is going to happen, a lot of tenants that were being rehoused because on the Section 21 order, there's no details of rent arrears. Now, that's going to go, and when you go under rent arrears, there's a rent arrears money order. They go to the council says, we're not going to rehouse you, you've made yourself intentionally homeless by not paying the rent. Unintended consequence. What's going to happen to those people? I say this to the government. I got them to sit with my landlord action. I've been on mostly half a dozen working groups in the last 6 years, 6 to 8, 10 years or whatever, since the Deregulation Act. So then we've seen a massive increase in Section 21, as I told you. Antisocial behaviour is an issue. You can use obviously ground 14 or ground 12 or whatever, discretionary grounds, but it's evidence-based. So if you've got any of you had an antisocial tenant, put your hands up. Okay, it can be a nightmare. And Section 21 was a safety blanket, but now you can't use it, you've got to get evidence. So you've got to get other co-tenants or neighbours to give witness statements. And sometimes if you've got someone with mental health or there's drug dealing, whatever, they're too scared. and everything's evidence-based. Yes, you've got to ring doorbell, and you can get a CAD number from the police and all that stuff. So I worried about that when this new regulation came in. And I actually put forward and said there should be an antisocial list or a severe rent arrears list, which is a separate, quicker list when it goes to court. Landlords now generally, when they were serving Section 21s, it was because they were selling. We were asking that questions. They want to move in, they want to refurb, they want to put the rent up. Retaliation eviction has increased. I gave evidence in 2014 I think it was, yeah. Never even heard of it, where basically a tenant complained about disrepair and the landlord served a Section 21. That was part of it, on abolishing Section 21 and serving it. So the reality is there will be a second spike. The second spike will be of landlords issuing the claim by the 31st of July. And I agree with Darren, you've got to get it in for a timely fashion. We had one case where we put a case in, the court came back to us a month and a half later. You can't get through to the court, by the way, it's impossible. You've got more chance to speak to Keir Starmer, all right? It's impossible. I've got someone whose half her job is to call the courts. It's impossible. You can't even go down to the courts or meet someone. You can't even file an application. I've got clients, we can't do it. It's just, they had court closures. The government and the Justice Secretary said they're going to invest £50 million in the courts. That should have been done years ago, before this all came in. It hasn't happened. And that's Michael Gove's fault and this current government's fault. They should have implemented it. And because of that, part of that has been a lack of confidence by landlords getting my property back. Yeah? Remember, we're not banks. Yeah? And that's why you need rent guarantee. So, I'm going to go through the next slide, please. We talked about ground one, and we talked about severe rent arrears as well. Darren's touched on that. They're all the mandatory grounds, okay, which are loads of them. I think the biggest kicker, which is what's touched on, rent arrears gone from 2 months to 3 months, 14 days to 28 days, okay? Again, the stuff I'm saying, it may sound a bit doom and gloomish. It's just real life, because I am on the ground, I see it. My job is, even though I'm like the boss of the company and I'm on the board, whatever, I speak to landlords, letting agents, tenants every single day. That's my job. I've been doing that for 25, 26 years since starting Landlord Action. And that's why I'm in the media and I talk about how it is. I tell the government how it is. I get landlords saying, well, Paul, why didn't you tell them this? Why didn't you, it's, you know, what happens is the agenda was set and it was about trying to win battles. And, you know, Ben would tell you that at the NRLA, you know, the dial has shifted. The type of tenant most probably has shifted. Tenants will be most probably more demanding. They'll be more aware of what's happening. But there is a demand. We'll be very clear, there is a demand. It's how do we adapt? How do we make sure that our property stands out? How do we maximise that? But because we have a lack of property, it means that rents will naturally go up. Do we agree with that? But how do we qualify our tenants? We're going to be more risk averse, most definitely. And then obviously you've got the discretionary grounds, and quite rightly, if it's antisocial behaviour, you can give 1 month's notice and issue the claim and get your hearing date. What happens is we have a thing called possession claims online where you get a hearing date. It's actually the one bit of decent thing that happens in the court system. You get a hearing date, case number, and a hearing date straight away because it's done digitally. It's pretty good. The problem that you have is when you go to court, there could be 20, 30 hearings. You have a 5-minute hearing. You don't hear anything from the tenant. They turn up lastminute.com. They have a duty solicitor and they were trying to adjourn it. You know, if they're not paying the rent, you know, the reality is getting the hearing date. You've got 3 months rent arrears. You're waiting another 2-3 months for the hearing date. Before you see the judge, you could be owed 6 months rent arrears if the tenant doesn't want to pay. Yeah? And then once you get the possession order, which is 14 days, then you have to apply for the bailiffs, which is the real problem, and I'm going to touch on that shortly. Okay? Does anyone know that lady? Did you say Rachel Thieves? I didn't say that. So this lady, Rachel, she had a licence with Southwark Council, but she didn't file it within the 21 days. Was she fined, yes or no? No, for some strange reason. Right, she wasn't fined. And the other lady, anyone know who the other lady is? Anyone? She was the homeless minister. And ironically, she served a Section 21 notice on her tenant to put the rent up. You couldn't write it. Ironically, she got sacked, right? And I won't talk about Angela Rayner. She does not pay shouldn't pay her tax. But what I'm saying, these people are in charge. They should be setting an example. Yeah? And the reality is rent repayment orders and civil penalty notices are the biggest threat for landlords. And if you've learned anything from me today, this is it. Okay? Not knowing or forgetting is not an offence. and it will hit you in the pocket. Yeah? So, failure for the written terms, the information sheet which I told you about, yeah, which you need to get onto straight away and get it served by my birthday, 31st of May. Prohibited you can send me a birthday cake as well. Prohibited pre-tenancy payment, you can't do that. Yeah? Attempting to let the property for a fixed term tenancy, old tenancy, a breach. Yeah? False misleading advertising the property, serving invalid notice, unlawful eviction, failure to license your property, that's in the place now. Knowingly or recklessly misusing a ground. Reletting the property within the 12 months of the tenant leaving on the ground of 1A, okay, or one family member. Discriminating against your tenant, yeah? Inviting, encouraging, accepting rent exceeding the advertised rent, taking more than 1 month's rent in advance. Failure to comply with an improvement notice. The rent repayment now under the Act goes from 12 months to 24 months. Some landlords it could bankrupt, yeah? There is going to be much more intense enforcement relating to this. It's the luck of the gods as to what council you're in and what environmental officer you're in. You know, in London, we've got 32 boroughs. You know, aggressively, you know, Southwark Council made £23 million last year just on licensing, not fines. You know, Newham Council, they've invested in enforcement for a long time. So this is serious business now. The game has changed. We are compliance officers, we're social workers, we're credit controllers, we're legal experts, we're handymen. This is what you have to do as being a self-managed landlord. And as landlords, and some of you have been doing this for a long time, you've earned the right to delegate and use an agent. You've earned the right to spend more time on the golf course or go on a cruise. Oh, you don't want to go on a cruise? No, okay. You know, so what I'm saying is you've earned the right. Do the stuff you're good at and delegate the stuff you don't want to do. You can't do everything. And that's what I mean is really important. The database will register where your property is, your certain details will be limited. You need to upload all your compliance documents. The tenant will have access, the councils will have access. And before anyone says it, because I get it asked in every talk, why isn't there a bad tenant database? Well, I totally agree with you, there should be. That just creates more homelessness. For some cheeky reason, when I was on the, what was it? I can't remember. I think I was on the HMO, when they brought in the change of HMOs in 2014. I was sitting next to the shelter, and we had all the stakeholders, and I said to them, can't we have a bad tenant database? And they looked at me like daggers. You create a bad tenant database if you enforce a money order if you go to court, and it shows as a CCJ. Only when you enforce the money order at court, it becomes a CCJ. So if you go to court and get a money order on Section 8, it's not a CCJ. Because I think that the rent arrears are going to get higher, you know, and I urge and highly recommend get rent guarantee insurance, which is what you obviously offer for your services. Getting a guarantor. There's a really good website, good company called rentguarantor.com, where the tenant will pay for a guarantor. So they've got a guarantor, and it covers the rent every month for legal fees. You know, I think landlords really need to look at that. So, you know, the fines for non-compliance are tending to be high, and this data is going to be mandatory when it comes in. Okay, the Ombudsman's going to be dealing with disputes for landlords. Okay, and the various complaints will be disrepair, housing conditions, communication issues. Most complaints relate to communication issues. So if you have a dispute with a tenant, deal with it earlier. Don't let it manifest. Because something to you that thinks petty is something big for a tenant, you know. And it's a people business. It's a 24/7 business landlording. Do we agree with that? You know, getting calls out and how you deal with things. Offering a service, you know. Next slide, please. So what are the state of the courts at the moment? The wait time's actually gone up to 26 weeks. The biggest crisis we have in the court system is the bailiffs. Yeah, we don't have enough bailiffs. We've got 300 bailiffs. Anyone want to be a bailiff, by the way? No? Get 23 grand a year? Get abused, that? No? Violence? No? It's not a nice bit, is it? I'm doing a campaign at the moment to be able to use a High Court enforcement officer. I've been planning this, I'm doing something at the moment. When we go to court, we plead Section 42 for leave to go to court, to transfer up to the High Court. But now it's up to the judge's discretion to give leave. So we get most probably about 3 out of 10, which means you can use a High Court enforcement officer and do an eviction within 6 to 8 weeks, rather than we waited 15 months at Clerkenwell County Court for an eviction. Luckily, that landlord was getting the rent. It was a Section 21. Sometimes when you're getting Section 21s, tenants just stop paying. Can you imagine not getting rent for 15 months? It can be crippling, you know. The average landlord, I mean, and we've seen a lot of those landlords leave. I mean, 85% of the market, landlords have between 1 and 3 properties, and we're seeing a lot of those landlords, retiring landlords, getting out. A lot of them aren't under financial pressure, they're just tired, you know. So you need to understand about the change. This is the step change, this is business review time when it comes to landlording, you know, it's really important. And we need more judges, because there's going to be more hearings, without a doubt, you know, there's going to be more breaches. And then what's going to be the norm is buying a property with a tenant in situ. I'm buying properties in the north, I go for yield between 10 and 12%. I buy with tenants in situ, I know what I'm doing, you know. I go for value. I'm buying something at the moment in Liverpool. So I'm not scared by it because I know it's a professional mindset. Remember, people need to sleep somewhere. We have a housing crisis. It might feel like it's half empty, but it is half full. We just got to get our processes and systems and paper chains and taxes and data all in order. Because if there's a dispute, we've got to be covered. Yeah, it's important. Okay? And then picking the right letting agent, you know. Anyone can be a letting agent. I mean, in 2 to 3 years' time, they're going to have ROPA, Regulation of Property Agents, where letting agents will have to be qualified up to a level 4. That's good news. You give your keys away, you lose control. You know, when I was on the TV programme, I'd expose dodgy agents. I got locked in 2 agents' offices. All right, one of them threatened to punch me, and it was all fit. They were called Carter Stones in Ilford, and they were nicking rents. And I was exposed. There was another one. What the worst agents for some reason are in East London. All right, loads from East London, Walthamstow, Leighton. Did one in Barking, one in Ilford. You know, they're all dodgy agents. I'm not saying all of them are, but it's funny actually because after when I kept on going back on the TV programme. Because what we were doing was, I'd get the clients to come with me, and they're all landlord action cases, and we'd wait for them to open up, and then we'd just steam in with a camera. And that was like a landlord or an agent's worst nightmare, seeing me with a camera, you know. And I remember doing a programme in Stockton-on-Tees. I mean, I travelled all over the country, and then I'd be in the office 7 o'clock in the morning. And when you're running your own business, you have to be quite militant, you become obsessed and stuff. I remember I did one case. I was knocked on a lady's door at 6:30 in the morning, Stockton-on-Tees. This property was horrendous, right? She owed 6 years rent arrears. Don't ask me why the landlord, he won Landlord of the Year, by the way, no, he didn't get it. Right? But what I'm saying, he owed 6 years rent arrears. Obviously, he didn't get the money, I was there to get the money. Landlords buried their head in the sand, you know. Landlords didn't put the deposit scheme, they didn't use a proper referencing company, didn't fully manage. They made classic mistakes. Tenants were more clued up than their landlord, and they were preying on their landlord. You know, they were going on websites and they were qualifying their landlords and offering them 6 months rent in advance. And once they were in there, then they would long it out, you know. So, and I think there's going to be tenants over it. So with the agents, who do we pick? Well, we go to, you know, various review sites, local reputation, speak to landlords that use other agents, what's their terms of business, go into their office, what property technology they use, what's the difference between let-only and full management. There's not a lot if you divide it by 12, okay. How transparent is the agent? How do they deal with repairs? You know, question them on renters' rights. I could go on, I could do a whole presentation. I do presentations for landlords on how to pick the right agent. I get so much in demand, I get asked by landlords to do 1 hour Zooms with me to do some strategy work or review their portfolio or help with disputes because of the issues. So, do we agree with that? But how do we qualify our tenants? We're going to be more risk averse, most definitely. And then obviously you've got the discretionary grounds, and quite rightly, if it's antisocial behaviour, you can give 1 month's notice and issue the claim and get your hearing date. What happens is we have a thing called possession claims online where you get a hearing date. It's actually the one bit of decent thing that happens in the court system. You get a hearing date, case number, and a hearing date straight away because it's done digitally. It's pretty good. The problem that you have is when you go to court, there could be 20, 30 hearings. You have a 5-minute hearing. You don't hear anything from the tenant. They turn up lastminute.com. They have a duty solicitor and they will try and adjourn it. You know, if they're not paying the rent, you know, the reality is, it's getting the hearing date, you've got 3 months rent arrears, you're waiting another 2-3 months for the hearing date. Before you see the judge, you could be owed 6 months rent arrears if the tenant doesn't want to pay. Yeah? And then once you get the possession order, which is 14 days, then you have to apply for the bailiffs, which is the real problem, and I'm going to touch on that shortly. Okay? Does anyone know that lady? Did you say Rachel Thieves? I didn't say that. So this lady, Rachel, she had a licence with Southwark Council, but she didn't file it within the 21 days. Was she fined, yes or no? No, for some strange reason. Right, she wasn't fined. And the other lady, anyone know who the other lady is? Anyone? She was the homeless minister. And ironically, she served a Section 21 notice on her tenant to put the rent up. You couldn't write it. Ironically, she got sacked, right? And I won't talk about Angela Rayner. She does not pay shouldn't pay her tax. But what I'm saying, these people are in charge. They should be setting an example. Yeah? And the reality is rent repayment orders and civil penalty notices are the biggest threat for landlords. And if you've learned anything from me today, this is it. Okay? Not knowing or forgetting is not an offence. And it will hit you in the pocket. Yeah? So, failure for the written terms, the information sheet which I told you about, yeah, which you need to get onto straight away and get it served by my birthday, 31st of May. Prohibited you can send me a birthday cake as well. Prohibited pre-tenancy payment, you can't do that, yeah? Attempting to let the property for a fixed term tenancy, old tenancy, a breach, yeah? False misleading advertising the property, serving invalid notice, unlawful eviction, failure to license your property, that's in the place now. Knowingly or recklessly misusing a ground. Reletting the property within the 12 months of the tenant leaving on the ground of 1A, okay, or one family member. Discriminating against your tenant, yeah? Inviting, encouraging, accepting rent exceeding the advertised rent, taking more than 1 month's rent in advance. Failure to comply with an improvement notice. The rent repayment now under the Act goes from 12 months to 24 months. Some landlords it could bankrupt, yeah? There is going to be much more intense enforcement relating to this. It's the luck of the gods as to what council you're in and what environmental officer you're in. You know, in London, we've got 32 boroughs. You know, aggressively, you know, Southwark Council made £23 million last year just on licensing, not fines. You know, Newham Council, they've invested in enforcement for a long time. So this is serious business now. The game has changed. We are compliance officers, we're social workers, we're credit controllers, we're legal experts, we're handymen. This is what you have to do as being a self-managed landlord. And as landlords, and some of you have been doing this for a long time, you've earned the right to delegate and use an agent. You've earned the right to spend more time on the golf course or go on a cruise. Oh, you don't want to go on a cruise? No, okay. You know, so what I'm saying is you've earned the right. Do the stuff you're good at and delegate the stuff you don't want to do. You can't do everything. And that's what I mean is really important. The database will register where your property is, your certain details will be limited. You need to upload all your compliance documents. The tenant will have access, the councils will have access. And before anyone says it, because I get it asked in every talk, why isn't there a bad tenant database? Well, I totally agree with you, there should be. That just creates more homelessness. For some cheeky reason, when I was on the, what was it? I can't remember. I think I was on the HMO, when they brought in the change of HMOs in 2014. I was sitting next to the shelter, and we had all the stakeholders, and I said to them, can't we have a bad tenant database? And they looked at me like daggers. You create a bad tenant database if you enforce a money order if you go to court, and it shows as a CCJ. Only when you enforce the money order at court, it becomes a CCJ. So if you go to court and get a money order on Section 8, it's not a CCJ. Because I think that the rent arrears are going to get higher, you know, and I urge and highly recommend get rent guarantee insurance, which is what you obviously offer for your services. Getting a guarantor. There's a really good website, good company called rentguarantor.com, where the tenant will pay for a guarantor. So they've got a guarantor and it covers the rent every month for legal fees. You know, I think landlords really need to look at that. So, you know, the fines for non-compliance are steadily high, and this data is going to be mandatory when it comes in. Okay, the Ombudsman's going to be dealing with disputes for landlords. Okay, and the various complaints will be disrepair, housing conditions, communication issues. Most of the complaints relate to communication issues. So if you have a dispute with a tenant, deal with it earlier. Don't let it manifest, because something to you that thinks petty is something big for a tenant. You know, and it's a people business. It's a 24/7 business landlording. Do we agree with that? You know, getting calls out and how you deal with things, offering a service. You know, next slide, please. So what are the state of the courts at the moment? The wait time's actually gone up to 26 weeks. The biggest crisis we have in the court system is the bailiffs. Yeah, we don't have enough bailiffs. We've got 300 bailiffs. Anyone want to be a bailiff, by the way? No? You get 23 grand a year? Get abused, that? No? Violence, no. It's not a nice bit to. I'm doing a campaign at the moment to be able to use a High Court enforcement officer. I've been planning this, I'm doing something at the moment. When we go to court, we plead section 42 for leave to go to court, to transfer up to the High Court, but now it's up to the judge's discretion to give leave. So we get most probably about 3 out of 10, which means you can use a High Court enforcement officer and do an eviction within 6 to 8 weeks, rather than we waited 15 months at Clerkenwell County Court for an eviction. Luckily, that landlord was getting the rent, it was a section 21. Sometimes when you're getting section 21s, tenants just stop paying. Can you imagine not getting rent for 15 months? It can be crippling, you know. The average landlord, I mean, and we've seen a lot of those landlords leave. I mean, 85% of the market, landlords have between 1 and 3 properties, and we're seeing a lot of those landlords, retiring landlords, getting out. A lot of them aren't under financial pressure, they're just tired, you know. So you need to understand about the change. This is the step change, this is business review time when it comes to landlording, you know, it's really important. And we need more judges, because there's going to be more hearings, without a doubt, you know, there's going to be more breaches. And then what's going to be the norm is buying a property with a tenant in situ. I'm buying properties in the north, I go for yield between 10 and 12%. I buy with tenants in situ, I know what I'm doing, you know. I go for value. I'm buying something at the moment in Liverpool. So I'm not scared by it because I know it's a professional mindset. Remember, people need to sleep somewhere. We have a housing crisis. It might feel like it's half empty, but it is half full. We just got to get our processes and systems and paper chains and taxes and data all in order. Because if there's a dispute, we've got to be covered. Yeah, it's important. Okay? And then picking the right letting agent, you know. Anyone can be a letting agent. I mean, in 2 to 3 years' time, they're going to have ROPA, Regulation of Property Agents, where letting agents will have to be qualified up to a level 4. That's good news. You give your keys away, you lose control. You know, when I was on the TV programme, I'd exposed dodgy agents. I got locked in 2 agents' offices. All right, one of them threatened to punch me, and it was all more fit. They were called Carter Stones in Ilford, and they were nicking rents. And I was exposed. There was another one. The worst agents for some reason are in East London. All right, loads from East London, Walthamstow, Leighton. Did one in Barking, one in Ilford. You know, they're all dodgy agents. I'm not saying all of them are, but it's funny actually because after when I kept on going back on the TV programme. Because what we were doing was, I'd get the clients to come with me, and they're all landlord action cases, and we'd wait for them to open up, and then we'd just steam in with a camera. And that was like a landlord or an agent's worst nightmare, seeing me with a camera, you know. And I remember doing a programme in Stockton-on-Tees. I mean, I travelled all over the country, and then I'd be in the office 7 o'clock in the morning. And when you run your own business, you have to be quite militant, you become obsessed and stuff. I remember I did one case. I was knocked on a lady's door at 6:30 in the morning, Stockton-on-Tees. This property was horrendous, right? She owed 6 years rent arrears. Don't ask me why the landlord, he won landlord of the year by the way, no, he didn't matter. Right? But what I'm saying, he owed 6 years rent arrears. Obviously he didn't get the money, I was there to get the money. Landlords bury their head in the sand, you know. Landlords didn't put the deposit scheme, didn't use a proper referencing company, didn't fully manage. They made classic mistakes. Tenants were more clued up than their landlord, and they were preying on their landlord. You know, they were going on websites and they were qualifying their landlords and offering 6 months rent in advance. And once they were in there, then they would long it out, you know. So, and I think there's going to be tenant surveys. So with the agents, who do we pick? Well, we go to, you know, various review sites, local reputation, speak to landlords that use other agents, what's their terms of business, go into their office, what property technology they use, what's the difference between let only and full management. There's not a lot if you divide it by 12, okay. How transparent is the agent? How do they deal with repairs? You know, question them on renters' rights. I could go on, I could do a whole presentation. I do presentations for landlords on how to pick the right agent. I get so much in demand, I get asked by landlords to do 1 hour Zooms with me to do some strategy work or review their portfolio or help with disputes because of the issues. So getting the right agent is your safety blanket. And it's really important to get them because they will take a lot of the aggravation away. Using an accreditor, do they belong to Property Mark or Safe Agent? Have they got client money protection in place, which is like what we offer? So if they go skint, your rent's covered. But if you go on holiday, you make sure your ABTA are covered, correct? On ATOL, because obviously if they tour operator goes bust, you're covered. And it's exactly the same agent. You know, what redress scheme do they belong to? Have they got professional indemnity insurance? There's a really good website called allagents.co.uk, if anyone writes it down, where there's a review site. Do your diligence on the agent, really important. Your agent is the most important is the most important appointment most probably you'd have when it comes to renting a property, you know. And how do we survive? You know, we can survive by obviously educating, investing in educating, going web. I do loads of webinars, loads of experts that do webinars. Go on webinars, they're free, you know. One of the websites we run, if you want to write it down, is landlordzone.co.uk. It's a breaking news website. We have a forum on there. You know, go on websites, understand what's happening in the market. You know, how many of you wanted to add to your portfolio and buy more property? I've put everyone off. I am because I know what I'm doing. I'm not saying you do. But there's going to be opportunities. Landlords are getting out. You know, other landlords are buying properties. People need to sleep somewhere, you know. I think the reality, some people are watching and waiting, understanding licensing. What technology do your agent use? Do you use technology? The days of the spreadsheets most probably are coming to an end. How do you embrace it? It's a step change, what we're going through. The game of landlording is changing. Are we able to change? You know, are we able to adapt? You know, because rents are getting higher. And how do we thrive? We must get a power team. We get the right letting agent. We get the right tradesman. We get the right lawyer involved, conveyancer, tax expert, education providers. Who do we have to rely on that can help us with our property, protect us, make us compliant, you know? Understanding what's happening with your portfolio. Really understanding what my strengths and what my weaknesses are. I might have a full-time job and not have time to fully manage like I used to. You know, tenants might be more demanding. Okay, it's important. It's important to review your stock. What's good stock? What's bad stock? I've been saying this on the road for the last 2 years. You know, this is good. This yield's good. I like enjoying this. The tenant's respectful. Property's only 5 miles away. It's good. It's working. The tenant's been there for a long time. They're treating us at home. They're giving me access. I'm happy, yeah? No news is good news. And then I've got the property that's 25 or 80 miles away. The tenant's obviously complaining about certain things. The state of the property is costing me too much money. I've got maintenance charges, you know, there's complaints, it's quite time consuming. And that's why landlords, maybe because they're selling or they've been doing the rent reviews or they've been looking at a scenario, and because of the regulation, they're not sure. They've been whacking in the Section 21s. And as I said, good tenants are being asked to leave properties. And that's why Section 21 is being abolished, for tenants to have greater security. And you have to have a breach of tenancy so you can quote a ground to go to court. So my predictions are, we're seeing a lot of slow growth in new developments, especially in London. We need to build more. You know, the cost of building materials, square footage, planning still is very slow. Landlords are selling to other landlords, buying tenants in situ. Interest rates, I think they're going to creep up again because of the inflation, unfortunately. Social housing, temporary accommodation. I was with one of the biggest temporary accommodation providers yesterday in London. They've got 2,500 units. I do a lot of non-exec work with them. They do 2, 3 and 5 year leases. They take it over. You don't touch it, guarantee the rent, no void periods, it falls outside renters' rights. Some landlords are looking at that option, where temporary accommodation tenants are moving in from the council. Pension funds, I work with pension funds, work with a lot of big pension funds. I've got one client's got 10,000 units. They're buying aggressively. You know, that landscape is changing. There's definitely more big portfolio pension funds coming in. Landlords need to be flexible, need to adapt and maybe diversify their portfolio. The tenants will be more vigilant, there will be more challenge to have access to AI. There will be court delays, unfortunately, but there will be opportunities for landlords that are going to remain in the sector, without a doubt. You know, the whole point of tonight is education, is to make you walk away and think, I've learned something there, you know. Next slide here. So there's my contact details. I'm going to take a picture of that. I'm going to ask just quickly, what's a breach when it comes to rent repayment orders? Shout out. Don't all shout at once.
3 months, is it?
No. What's a breach that you could get a rent repayment order, civil penalty notice? Pardon? Correct, you're going to have a stress ball. Catch. Oh, you tried to be cool there with one hand, didn't you? I'll tell you one funny story. I was in Newcastle in September 23. There was 150 Geordies, right? They were doing, and I normally did a question, name 5 things that keep a landlord awake at night, mental as well. And the last person said tax. And he was right at the back of the room, so I launched it, threw it, and I smashed the chandelier. God's honest truth. I had to send some flowers, I wish she would have sued me. So now I throw them under the arm. Any others? What else could you get fined for? Pardon? No? I thought you were clever, you lot, in, you know, come on. Correct. Well done. Yeah, you can't ask more than 1 month's remote. One was stressful. Anyone?
Taking a property above your asking price.
Correct. There you go. Thank you.